the health of this offensive line is going to hinge on Jason Kelsey. He's made 124, I think, straight starts.
Yeah.
He's the anchor. He's the one that's going to make this line what everybody expects it to be. But my expectations are pretty high. I know there's holes at safety, but every NFL team has holes that's somewhere on that roster, and the safety just happens to be where it is for Philadelphia.
We might have to drop Jody out and see if he can come back in town. And between time, we'll talk. Ed and I'll talk. We're used to that.
Yeah.
First of all, as I said, fresh off Niagara Falls, world traveler. You got the passport out. You're going across the border to Canada. How was the trip, buddy?
Well, first of all, John, let me wish you a happy birthday. I believe that was yesterday.
Yeah, it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, by the way.
Yeah, 40 years old again, huh? It's nice. Yeah. Congratulations.
I appreciate nothing to celebrate at this age, but I appreciate everyone with their well wishes.
Yeah, I'm a big birthday guy. I celebrate each and every one, not as like I used to, with a beer in each hand, but I still celebrate.
I did have a beer in each hand at one point. That's about all I do to celebrate. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. So I went to the Hockey Hall of Fame. I've been to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton. I've been to the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Mass. And now I've been to the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto, which was really cool. Haven't been to Cooperstown though, the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Now that shocks me. That would be the one, for me, the Pro Football Hall of Fame is the biggest, but for most people, I think baseball would be the number one Hall of Fame, and it's relatively close. I'm surprised Ed Kracz hasn't been to the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. Just opportunity, I guess. I covered something in Canton and saw the Pro Football, and that's still to me the top Hall of Fame out there. And I'd put the Hockey Hall of Fame second. I'm a big hockey fan, big ice hockey fan. I played the sport on the street, not the ice. I played street hockey as a kid.
Did they have a street hockey wing in the Hall of Fame?
Not that I was able to locate, but I didn't get through the whole thing. I have to say I was only in there for about an hour. Probably need more like 2 hours to see the whole thing. But what I saw was pretty awesome. And it was a good trip and glad to be back. And thanks for covering those Eagles. I've been reading all your work and,
SI.com/NFL/Eagles. I did see you got a picture with the Stanley Cup.
It exists. It still exists. The Flyers haven't seen it for 40 years, but it's still there. The cup is still out there.
It's interesting. So, you're a Philadelphia sports fan in general. And I look at the landscape of this city, and I think most people think, for where they were and because they have Joel Embiid, the Sixers would probably be the closest to being a championship level team, at least before the playoffs and people got to see the warts. If I told you the Eagles were the closest professional sports team to a championship, excluding the Philadelphia Union, that's from my buddy Kevin Kincaid of Crossing Broad. I don't want to leave the Union out, but for this exercise, I will. Are the Eagles the closest to being a championship contender?
I would say yes at this point. Although the Phillies resurgence now has me thinking, hey, maybe the Phillies can sneak into the World Series, but that's way too wishful thinking. And you're right about the Sixers. You thought with Joel Embiid, maybe they would be the next team, and they still could very well be. But you look at this Eagles team, and I know you have, John, and it's a team that if everything falls into place this season, they could make a push for the Super Bowl. I know the NFC is perceived to be the weaker of the two conferences, and that's true, but you still have the defending champion LA Rams in there. Not easy for a team to repeat. I don't think we've had a repeat winner since the Patriots.
Yeah.
So it's not easy, right? But the Rams are still a very, very good team. The Bucks with Tom Brady back, you can't discount them. They seem to have every piece back in place from a season ago. So those are the two strongest teams. You have the Packers, of course, with Aaron Rodgers. They're the number one seed the last 2 years, but still, I think the Eagles could be the team that, if you look across the NFL or the professional landscape in Philadelphia, with just the four main sports. I know the Union, a lot of Union fans out there, and they have a very good club, but I think you can make a very strong case that the Eagles will be the next team to win a championship in the city.
And I'd like to call this list season, Ed. We have the lull, obviously, between OTAs, and with the Eagles, there's obviously no mini camp. So now I believe training camp opens July 26th or 27th. I forget, but
26th, I think, is when they report.
26th is when they
report.
Report. And so we have this lull. So, everybody's doing their list. I did a list at Sports Illustrated, the top 5 sort of unheralded players who kind of showed up in the two hours we got to see practice as reporters. Other people are doing their, power rankings and things like that. Couple lists I saw over the past couple days, Ed, speaks to this sort of high expectation level of this Eagles team. Wide receiver, which, this team hasn't had 1,000-yard receiver in forever. And all of a sudden, Pro Football Focus is projecting they have the 4th best wide receiver group in the entire NFL. They haven't had a 1,000-yard receiver since Jeremy Maclin. All of a sudden they get A.J. Brown. Everything kind of falls into place. Devontae Smith is going to improve in year 2, and he was very close to that 1,000 yards. But all of a sudden, less pressure on him as a number 2 receiver versus a number 1. And then also at the 33rd team, which is Joe Banner's website, Mike Tannenbaum's website, our old buddy Damo writes for them now. They did their offensive line tier rankings, and to no one's surprise, the Eagles were in tier 1 with only 3 other teams. So right there's an example of 2 positions where some pretty reputable outlets have the Eagles top 5 in the entire NFL. Now, we can also point to some deficiencies, safety, and I don't know if it's fair to say deficiency, but I think it's fair to question whether Jalen Hurts can distribute the football consistently to that good receiving core. So where are you on the expectation level of this team? Is it are people, I'd like to use this term, Ed, are people skipping steps with the Eagles?
Yeah, I'm pretty high with my expectations, I'll say. I think they can win 11 games. They won 9 last year, and I know they played some quarterbacks that, don't deserve to be, starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and that helped. But I think this roster is better than what they finished the season at last year. We've seen it reflected, like you said, in the receiver rankings. A.J. Brown makes all the difference in the world with this passing offense, in my opinion. Now you have to defend the perimeter, both perimeters. You just can't load up and double team a Smith or, a Dallas Goedert over the middle. You have to play an honest defense against this team because of those weapons. Now, of course, everything comes back to Jalen Hurts. Is he capable of distributing the football to the playmakers that he has, to this vaunted wide receiver class and the very good tight end in Goddard? And you have some backs that can catch the ball out of the backfield with Kenny Gainwell and Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. So it all is going to come down to Jalen Hurts. You can have these great rankings at every position, but where does Jalen Hurts rank, among the quarterback class? And he is, by rankings I've seen, I don't think he's been in the top 15. He has to go out and prove that he can be the guy. Because he does have a terrific offensive line. I wouldn't argue at all with the 33rd team that has ranked them in the top tier of offensive lines. And that's kind of where it's going to start with this team is, they were able to stay relatively healthy last year. I know they lost Isaac Seumalo for the season very early on, but they had a very capable fill-in in Dickerson. So, and that was a revelation really to see Dickerson play with Jordan Mailata on that left side. That makes them stronger. Now you do have a spot open at the right guard spot, but again, you have some players that can fill that role with Siamalu moving over and Jack Driscoll. But so much of the health of this offensive line is going to hinge on Jason Kelsey. He's made 124, I think, straight starts.
Yeah.
He's the anchor. He's the one that's going to make this line what everybody expects it to be. But my expectations are pretty high. I know there's holes at safety, but every NFL team has holes that's somewhere on that roster, and the safety just happens to be where it is for Philadelphia. But I think it's a cover. You can cover that hole up with what you have at the corner, what you have at linebacker, and what you have on the defensive line. The linebacker group, John, I don't know ranking-wise where they have fallen, but that's a pretty good unit, I think. It has the potential to be very good, this linebacking group. So that's another strong part of this team, I feel. And that's weird to say, just like it's weird to say with the receivers when you haven't had a receiver go over 1,000 yards since Jeremy Maclin in 2014. But still, my expectations are high. I think Hurts is a capable quarterback that can get this done. And I think they're an 11-win team. Some people probably say over that, but I want to temper it a little bit. But I think they can win 11 games.
Yeah, linebacker's interesting to me because it's certainly the best the Eagles have had in a number of years. The group, I think, at least on paper. But there is a lot of projection. We don't know if Nakobe Dean is going to be able to step in, and the Eagles started him very slowly. I think people who thought, everybody projected him as a potential first-round pick, and they're going to throw him into the deep end of the pool, which they will do with Jordan Davis. They started him behind TJ Edwards and Kaiser White, which I don't think surprised many people, but they also started him behind Davion Taylor and even Christian Ellis. And are basically saying, okay, Rook, work your way up, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. But if I had to sit here on June 13th, and I am sitting here on June 13th, so I'm going to ask you, which one, and I'm going to throw Davion in there as well, because I think the Eagles like Davion Taylor more than people realize. So you have board linebackers, TJ Edwards, Kaiser White, Davion Taylor, Nakobe Dean. You generally are only going to play two for major snaps. Which two of those four do you think is going to get the most reps from Jonathan Gannon?
I think TJ Edwards, at least initially. I think Edwards will be the guy that gets the most reps. And, it's interesting, when you look at Kaiser White, I think he's very good. And I think he could be another leader in the rep department there. I think Edwards and White would probably lead the way, at least early on. Because like you said, with Nakobe Dean, they're not just going to hand him anything. And when Howie Roseman put this linebacker room together in the offseason, adding Hassan Reddick, adding Kaiser White, he didn't know Nakobe Dean was going to be sitting there in the third round. He wasn't, kind of intent on saying, yeah, we're going to get Nakobe Dean in the third round, so let's not sign White or sign Reddick. He had no idea that Dean would fall there. But when he fell to, into the 80s when the Eagles picked in the third round, they could not take him. So, yeah, right now it looks very strong because they did add Dean. And listen, I forgot Hassan Reddick in that mix as far as the reps go. Reddick.
Well, no, because, if you think about, I don't think you forgot him. If you think about the way the Eagles are splitting this up, and Jonathan Gannon has explained, they're going to have these overhang players, as he calls them, edge rushers. And that's sort of a combination of defensive end and Sam linebacker. So guys like Hassan Reddick and even Patrick Johnson and Kyron Johnson, they're in that room with Jeremiah Washburn getting coached up by him, whereas the linebackers, the off-ball linebackers, the names we mentioned, the Deans, the Whites, the Taylors, the Edwards, they're with Nick Rallis. So the Eagles kind of consider them different positions. So I think you're right. I think it's about those four off-ball linebackers and which two of those. Hassan Reddick's going, but Hassan Reddick's job is go get the quarterback.
Yeah.
That's going to be his job, and it's going to be interesting to see how they sort of manipulate the edge rushers. Is it going to be Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick? Is it going to be Brandon Graham? How much of that? They're very deep in the front seven for the first time in a long time. And the more you look at this team, and maybe it is maybe we have too much time to think about this stuff in the off season, but they do look good on paper. And I'm the negative one, Ed.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's true. But I love Kaiser White in this defense. I think, his strengths play to what Gannon wants to do. And they need somebody to, match up against the tight end. The tight ends, and, killed this team last year. And I think White is pretty good in coverage. And I think he gives them that extra layer of protection in the coverage game. And, it was funny, like we saw, sticking to those overhang players, we saw Derek Barnett and Brandon Graham getting some outside linebacker work too.
Yeah.
Right? They're dropping them in coverage. So when you talk about the versatility, you have to talk about that front seven, because there's plenty of versatility and so many different things Gannon can do week to week with these players. And that's what he talked about last year, is he didn't want to kind of define any one position, right? He wanted guys to, play multiple positions and keep offenses kind of off balance, but he didn't have the personnel really to do it, or even maybe the time to do it. In his first season, hit the ground running, getting used to being a defensive coordinator, getting used to your personnel. And then the season's here and they're working, on game planning each week. So, now he kind of knows what these players can do, and he can start cross-training them a little bit more and then see what he has. And I think it's going to make this defense even more tougher, I should say, for offenses to match up against.
But now you mentioned something a little bit earlier, Ed, about health, and obviously that's a big part of the NFL. That's kind of baked into this whole thing. Everybody's got to stay healthy. We all understand that. We're as healthy as possible. But the Eagles have tried to legislate health, I guess, is the best way I would describe it, by scaling back on the off-season work. Under the CBA, which if you talk to most coaches, Ed, they will tell you 13 practices is not enough. So that's what the Eagles had at their disposal. If they chose to use it, they ended up doing 6. So less than 50%. Couple questions on this. And I think it's unfair. And for the Eagles as a whole, if you think about, these are organizational decisions, and Nick Sirianni has got to go up and explain them to us and reporters. And you go back to Doug Peterson. I always like to bring up the White House. When the Eagles won the Super Bowl, they were going to go to the White House. Everyone disliked the president. That shifted in a different direction. They didn't end up going. And poor Doug Peterson had to go up there and talk about it. And I always said, that should be Jeffrey Lurie up there. That should be, at the very least, Howie Roseman. But no, it's the head coach. And I get the feeling much lesser in this circumstance, but still, Nick Sirianni's not the guy declaring this. Nick Sirianni's not the guy that doesn't want to be out there and practicing. But Nick Sirianni has to explain it. Number one, do you think that's true, or do you think Nick's on board? And number two, do you think that's fair for the Eagles to ask their head coach to explain things like this?
Well, I think Nick's in on these conversations. I really do.
Well, I know he's in on the conversation, but
and I think he's okay with it. I mean, and listen, I don't think they even practiced 6 times. I think it was only 5 when you factor in the fact that they were supposed to practice on June 9th, right, this past Thursday, and they didn't. We asked, Nick was asked on Wednesday if they were going to practice on Thursday, and he said no, they weren't going to practice. So that to me leaves 5 OTA practices. And we're old school. We want to see them out there, doing this and practicing and getting better. And how do you know your team is getting better if you're not practicing on the field? But I thought Nick did a pretty good job in defending the organizational decision on this, which I do think he is a part of. I think he's on board with this. And that is, hey, we had an extra week of weightlifting, in phase one, which cut into our OTAs. And hard to argue, guys look, pretty jacked up. Look at Brandon Graham. He looks huge. I thought
Yeah, he
David
does.
Taylor
Yeah.
looks bigger. Jalen Hurts, it looks stronger. So, they had the extra week of weightlifting. Then he said, we had rookie developmental periods, which the media and nobody else saw. So it was kind of like two different sessions. They had the rookies practicing another dozen or so 7-on-7 plays after the regular veteran practice was finished. And then he said, and I thought this was a good point. You don't want guys to get stale by practicing too much and doing the same things. So they use this time to work on technique and fundamentals and to really drill those over and over and over again. And Brandon Graham said he thinks it's a smarter approach to work on those issues instead of going out there and, hitting every day and this and that. I'm not sure it really helps the injury front because they took this same approach last year and they lost Brandon Graham in week 2. They lost Isaac Siamalu early on. They lost Davion Taylor late in the season. They had some injury lists that were pretty lengthy. So I don't think there's any way to, legislate against injury, but I do think that there is a way to keep the body fresh, keep the legs strong and, responding to what you want it to do and to stay mentally sharp. And, banging on each other every day in the spring, I don't think is going to achieve any of those goals. I mean, you're going to be sore. I know you have some time to recover, but I like it. I mean, I'm coming around to it. Like I said, I want to see them out there doing 11-on-11, doing a little bit of hitting, work the offensive and defensive lines. I mean, what must Jordan Davis think coming from college where they probably hit a lot
Yeah.
in Georgia?
Yeah.
And he comes here and he's like, well, when am I going to get to hit somebody?
Yeah.
So but I think it is an organizational decision. But I think Nick, obviously, he's in on those talks. I think he's okay with it. I think he's fine with this approach. And we'll see if more teams don't go this direction going forward. It's certainly different. Not many teams, I would say, practice 5 times or fewer. They were the only 1 or 2 teams that didn't have that mandatory mini camp where you usually do see some hitting. Them and the Bengals, they were the only 2. So old school. I hate seeing it, but I'm coming around to it.
Well, I do like Nick's explanation of cutting out 11-on-11s because you can't hit anyway. You can't put the pads on anyway.
Yeah.
So why you out there and you're telling Jason Kelsey, all right, go half speed. And he mentioned Fletcher Cox as well. Guys like that, it's kind of tough to tell them to go. And hey, so why are they out there? So I'd like the fact that they cut it down to 7-on-7s. And for the most part, I say all the time, I don't think the Jason Kelce's and Fletcher Coxes of the world need spring work. I mean, they know what they're doing. That it's not important for them, but I do think it's important for the developmental players and the guys who haven't reached their ceiling as a player, and they're not getting opportunities. That's who I'm concerned about because I think player development is real. We see it all the time. TJ Edwards, we talked about him earlier. I think he's the most underrated player on this football team. I remember talking to TJ back, it might have been last year, might have been when we talked to him in the spring. And he mentioned as an undrafted guy, he when he got here as a rookie, he was 9th on the depth chart. 9th on the depth chart. And now he's the Eagles' best linebacker, and he's sort of like the leader in the clubhouse. Nakobe Dean's got to knock him off. If TJ Edwards came in this environment, do the Eagles even notice him? Do they have a chance to notice him? I guess the classroom. How do you notice the TJ Edwards?
Yeah, I would say classroom's a big part of it, and they are on the field. Like, are they transitioning from the classroom to the field? Are they taking what they're learning in the classroom and applying it on the field when they get out there. Guys like Reed Blankenship, there's a role for a safety here. Jared Maiden, who had a really good spring, in the 2 hours that
In the
reporters
2
were able to
hours.
see.
He was one of my top 5.
I saw, yep, good story on the 5 under the radar free or 5 under the radar Eagles during spring, and Jared Maiden was on your list. But yeah, I think that there's opportunity to kind of show what you can do, as long as you're retaining what they're teaching you and taking it on the field. Yeah, you can find that out. I think, look, every football player is physically gifted, and every NFL player is physically gifted in some form or another. And again, Brandon Graham made this point. They're here because of their physical gifts. Now it becomes a mental game, like what's between the ears. And that's kind of what Sirianni is preaching is, you have to learn the mental side of this game. You have to learn the fundamental and technique until you can do it in your sleep. And Jason Kelsey's talked about that as he's gone over run fits with Jeff Stoutland for the last 6 years. He can do it in his sleep. And that's what you want. You want that muscle memory where you're not out there thinking, and then you can let your physical gifts take over. And listen, again, it's the spring. You don't want to get nicked up going into this 6 or 7 week down period, having to rehab something that popped up while you were going too hard in the spring. And we've seen players that hit when you're not supposed to be hitting. It can get pretty physical when guys are just in shells. You don't have to have pads on. It's still pretty intense sometimes, these practices in shells, that they can be. But I think at training camp, we're going to see a lot of hitting when it comes to practicing in Cleveland and practicing in Miami. May not see a whole lot of it in Philadelphia, for the fans that show up to training camp. But, they're going to get their chance to hit come late summer, and they're going to get that physical part of it down. They're going to be able to work on those physical tools. But I think it's the right approach right now. And especially when you hear Brandon Graham say, hey, it's what's between the ears. We're all here because we're physically gifted athletically. And now we got to just translate the mental part of the game into what we can do physically.
Joint practice champions, Ed Kracz, 4-0 last year. Can they go 4-0 this year against the Cleveland Browns, Miami Dolphins? They're going to be on the road. It's going to be more difficult.
Against two very good teams, too. Teams with very good rosters.
Very talented rosters.
Yeah. It'll be good tests this summer for them.
A little bit better than last year. I think the Jets are obviously the Jets. They're getting a little bit better, but last year, not a very talented team. And New England, if you think about, they were sort of rebuilding as well with Mac Jones, and Cam Newton was still there at the time, taking all the first team reps.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't great. The talent they should see this summer should get them ready, because Cleveland is a really good football team. Don't know if they're going to have the quarterback situation because of everything's going on. Miami, same thing, for different reasons. A very talented roster, but do they have the quarterback to take advantage of it? Maybe all three of those teams. It's apropos. That's going to be a theme. I just came up with a theme for those.
Put it in your notebook. Put it in your notebook so we can revisit it.
I just came up with the theme just like that. He is Ed Kracz, at Kracz E on Twitter, si.com/NFL/Eagles, EagleMaven.com is the easiest way to get there. Ed, I'll leave you with this. I got to ask you about Niagara Falls, because I haven't been there in, I was trying to think about 20, 25 years maybe. How many times have you been there? What's the first time? I want to know how much it's changed. Do you have that dichotomy? Is this the first time? I don't know. Is this the first time you've been there?
I had been there this was my fourth time, actually.
Oh, so
Yeah, but the first two were very, quite a while ago. The most recent, prior to this past trip, was when the Eagles played in Buffalo 3 years ago in 2019. I drove up, took my wife and two of my daughters, and my girls loved it. And I don't think it's really changed at all, But it's funny because the falls, they keep talking about how they're eroding like 3 feet every year, and I'm not sure if the erosion's got them going down smaller and smaller or back further, into the land. But they still look the same height to me. It's still a pretty breathtaking view when you look at it. But when we went at the end of October in 2019 when the Eagles played the Bills, there were Eagles fans, of course, all over. So you're on the Maid of the Mist, that ride that brings you right up to the falls, which is spectacular. And you're hearing Eagle chants, EAG on the boat, and which was fantastic. But there were none of those Eagle chants this year, of course. But that was a pretty cool experience to be at Niagara Falls listening to these Eagle chants break out every now and then. But I still think it's a great experience if you haven't been there or it's been a while. It hasn't changed a lot, but the attractions are still there, and there's still a lot of fun to do. And it like my daughter said, I stare at these falls, and it's still breathtaking every time you look at them.
It is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
and the water's really like green, and it's clean, and it's clear, and it's just it's just a really nice experience. And then, like I said, we went up to Toronto, where the Hockey Hall of Fame is, and the CN Tower, and there's some things to do in Toronto, and it's only about an hour 15-minute drive, so it's not bad. So yeah, I think it's a great trip, and Niagara Falls is a really one of those national landmarks that you should go see. And I know the Eagles are going out to Arizona in October. The Grand Canyon's sitting there too.
There we go. I know.
Beautiful.
Now your wife gets you all these deals, right? See, I don't know where you have time to figure this out. I got to get my wife on this stuff.
Yeah, she's the one. She loves planning all this travel stuff, and I'm just along for the ride. It's the same when we got married. I'm like, honey, just tell me the day and the time where I pick up my tux, and I'll be there. And it's kind of the same way with the vacation stuff. She does all the planning, books all the hotel, the travel, breaks it all down. So I don't have to mess with it. I just go with the flow.
Best way to go. And you went with the flow. I appreciate you getting up early. Ed Kracz, Birds 365. We haven't had you in a couple of weeks, so the listeners have been clamoring for their segment with Ed Kracz. There you have it. SI.com/NFL/Eagles. Read Ed there. You can read me there as well. Appreciate it, Ed. See you soon. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Obviously, you're going to be back on Birds 365. But
absolutely,
thanks again.
Forward to it. You got it, John. See ya.